All right, little Saturday action getting into the meat and potatoes of this slate. Talking about UNC taking on Appalachian State, 12 o'clock Eastern kickoff on Saturday, September 3rd, 2022. North Carolina's -1, totals 55.5. We did see a 2-point move toward the Mountaineers in the early wagering. Movement toward Appalachian State. And I'll tell you this much, as lackluster as the Tar Heel defense looked against Florida A&M, I really don't think it matters how bad they played. This is a Tar Heel team that can score with the best of them. Drake May, he completed over 78% of his passes in the opener and had 5 touchdowns. Meanwhile, running back Amarion Hampton ran for over 100 yards, and he scored twice. When it comes to defensive performance, well, Power Echols led the charge for the Tar Heels with double-digit tackles and a sack in the opener. Now, they're taking on an Appy State team who actually had a tough time covering the number down the home stretch last year. They failed to cover in their final 3 ball games, and they actually gave up 59 points to Western Kentucky in the bowl game. Now, total-wise, the Mountaineers saw overs against the likes of Troy, UL Monroe, and Georgia Southern. Meanwhile, North Carolina went 6-2 to the over in their last 8, dating back to last season. Give me North Carolina -1, over 55.5. Next contest, South Dakota State taking on Iowa, 12 o'clock Saturday. No number posted yet for this game, but regardless of whatever this number comes out at, this Iowa defense is going to be way too powerful for the Jackrabbits. Some of these guys might end up getting hurt, seriously. This is going to be a really physical contest here for South Dakota State. Now, the Hawkeyes, they held their opponents to 24 points or less in 8 out of their last 10 ball games last year. This Hawkeye secondary also had a staggering 25 interceptions last season as well. That is a huge number. Hardly sounds believable. That is crazy. Riley Moss and Jamari Harris, they had 4 interceptions apiece. Meanwhile, Lucas Van Ness and Joe Evans, they had 14 total sacks between the two of them. Hell, I'll tell you what, the Hawkeyes may score more points on defense Saturday than the Jackrabbits will on offense. Now, South Dakota State, they suffered losses to the likes of regular South Dakota, Northern Iowa, and Southern Illinois last season. This could get ugly. I'm going to lean toward Iowa getting the job done against the number. Next matchup, Sam Houston State, Texas A&M, 12 o'clock Saturday. That's another one that could get ugly. This game's still off the board. Might not see a number posted for this game. The Aggies just have entirely too much talent and obviously more money, more resources, and better coaching. They're also returning defensive back Antonio Johnson, who had 79 tackles and 5 PBUs last season. Now, the Aggies had marquee wins over the likes of Auburn, South Carolina, and Alabama. They actually scored in the 40s against South Carolina and Alabama. They're taking on a Sam Houston team who was actually kind of dominant on the FCS level last year, but they did have some breakdowns defensively toward the end of the season. They actually allowed over 37 points a game in their final 3 contests, throwing out that Abilene Christian game. This should probably be a bloodbath. I'm going to lean toward Texas A&M covering the point spread if they even come out with a number for that game. All right, next contest. It is going to be Rutgers, BC, 12 o'clock East. Boston College is the 7-point favorite, totals 49. Now, the line did move 2 points downward toward the under and a half a point toward BC. And even though Boston College is favored by a touchdown, they really don't have the offensive weapons to put this one out of reach. They averaged only 16 points a game in their final 8 contests last year. And even though they lost their starting quarterback early in the year, there's really no telling what this Boston College offense is going to look like here this year. They're taking on a Rutgers squad who did beat the likes of Indiana and Illinois last year. They also had a real nice cover over Michigan where they held the Wolverines to just 20 points. Now, Max Melton led the secondary with 5 PBUs and 3 interceptions. And that actually includes a pick six in those 3 interceptions. Meanwhile, Mohamed Toure, he had 4.5 sacks and 51 tackles himself. Now, when it comes to the number, Rutgers went 7-3 to the under in their last 10. Meanwhile, Boston College saw 8 out of their last 10 fall under the line themselves. I'm going to lean toward Rutgers plus 7, under 48. Next ball game, it is going to be NC State taking on East Carolina, 12 o'clock East. The NC State Wolfpack, they are minus 11, totals 55. Steady action on the Wolfpack, 1-point move on the sides thus far. If you like the Pirates of ECU and an outright win, they're plus 310 for some money line cash. Now, the Pirates did end up winning a bunch of games here last season. That said, though, they failed to cover in their last 2 games, and they gave up 70 total points in those failures. Now, East Carolina also came up a bit short in big games. They lost to the likes of Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF. They're also facing a highly touted NC State team who really had a strong year offensively in 2021. The Wolfpack scored 27 points or more in each of their last 10 ball games. Quarterback Devin Leary, he also threw for over 3,400 yards and 35 touchdowns. Meanwhile, on the defensive end, Drake Thomas led the charge with 99 tackles, 6 sacks, and 3 picks. When it comes to the total, NC State went 7-3 to the over in their last 10. Meanwhile, ECU saw overs against Navy, Memphis, and Tulane. I'm going to lean toward NC State minus 11, over 55. Next matchup, it is going to be Delaware taking on Navy, 12 o'clock Eastern kickoff. This game's currently off the board. Now, the Navy midshipmen, they were an absolute covering machine last year. Aside from rushing for 1 billion yards, they covered the number in 8 out of their last 10. As a matter of fact, they garnered marquee covers over the likes of Cincinnati, Central Florida, and Houston. They also played some really tough defense at times last year as well. John Marshall had 54 tackles last season, along with a sack and a fumble recovery. Now they're facing a Delaware squad on the other side who had a real tough time moving the football in 2021. They struggled offensively. They scored 24 points or less in 8 out of their last 9 ball games. I think Navy should be able to run right through these guys. I think this is going to be a tough one for the Blue Hens. Give me the Navy midshipmen getting the job done against the number. All right, next matchup. It is going to be Colorado State taking on Michigan. 12 o'clock Eastern start time. The Michigan Wolverines are minus 31, total 61.5. Big line move toward the Wolverines in this one. 4 points already, and it continues to climb. Now, Jim Harbaugh, he kind of lives for games like this, really wants to set the tone and make a statement. This is one of those games where a rah-rah guy like Jim Harbaugh can really put it out of reach. And the Wolverines are definitely no stranger to covering big numbers. They went 8-2 against the spread in their last 10 outings. That includes big wins over the likes of Iowa, Ohio State, and Maryland. And aside from the playoff game, this Michigan offense really couldn't be stopped. They averaged 37 points a game in their final 9 ball games, throwing out that Georgia contest. They also get back Blake Corum, who rushed for over 6.5 yards a carry and scored 11 times on the ground. Now, defensively, the Wolverines held Iowa, Penn State, and Wisconsin to 17 points or less last year. Junior Colson had 60 tackles from that linebacker spot, along with a fumble recovery and a couple of PBUs. Now, they're taking on a Colorado State team on the other side who doesn't move the ball all too much themselves. They were held to 24 points or less in 5 out of their last 6 ball games. They were all losses, by the way, those games I just mentioned. And when it comes to the total, the Rams went 4-0 to the over in their last 4 straight. Meanwhile, Michigan saw overs in 3 out of their last 4 themselves. I'm going to lean toward Michigan minus 31, over 61.5. All right, next contest, it is going to be Central Connecticut State taking on UConn. 12 o'clock Eastern start time. I'll tell you what, talk about a barn burner here. The Huskies of UConn, their defensive unit continues to struggle. They allowed over 43 points a game in their final 4 ball games of 2021. And as far as their loss in the opener is concerned, they allowed 31 total points to Utah State. They're taking on a Central Connecticut team who averaged 33 points a game in their final 4 contests last year. They actually got the W in 3 out of those 4 ball games I just mentioned. When it comes to the total, UConn did see their opener with Utah State fall under the number. They also saw unders last season against the likes of Clemson, Yale, and UMass. So believe it or not, I'm going to lean toward Central Connecticut State catching the points and getting the job done against the number. Gotta imagine they're going to be catching a whole lot of points. All right, next matchup, it is going to be Buffalo taking on Maryland, 12 o'clock Eastern start time. The Maryland Terrapins are minus 23.5, total 63. Now, we saw a couple point move toward the Terrapins in this one, couple of points. The Terps finished their season scoring 94 total points in their last 2 ball games. Talia Tungavaloa, he finished 10th in the NCAA in passing. He threw for nearly 3,900 yards and completed just about 70% of his passes. Now, Raheem Jarrett, he also averaged over 13 yards of reception and over 62 grabs. Now, of course, stud wideout Dante Demas should be returning after a tough injury early in the season last year. Now, they're taking on a Buffalo team who certainly had their hands full in the MAC last year. They lost their last 4 games of the season, and they went just 3-7 straight up in their last 10. This is also a team who was pretty bad against the number. They successfully covered in just 2 times in that time frame I just mentioned. Of course, the Buffs had a lot of problems on defense in 2021. They allowed 24 points or more in 8 out of their final 10 games. Now, when it comes to the total in this one, Buffalo saw 3 out of their final 4 contests get over the number. Meanwhile, Maryland went 7-2 to the over in their last 9. I'm going to lean toward the Maryland Terrapins minus 23.5 and the over 63. All right, next matchup, it is going to be Richmond taking on Virginia, 12:30 Eastern start time. Another game's off the board here, and even though the Cavaliers struggled down the home stretch, they really did remarkable things offensively last year. Brennan Armstrong was 4th in college football in passing yards. He threw for over 4,400 yards, along with 31 touchdowns. Now, he also ran it in 9 times with his legs. Now, the Spiders are going to have to deal with wide receiver Dontavion Wicks for Virginia. He had over 1,200 yards receiving, and he averaged 21 yards a catch. Now, they're taking on a Richmond squad who suffered losses to the likes of Elon, James Madison, and Stony Brook. As a matter of fact, in the Spiders' first 4 games last year, they were averaging only 8 points a game offensively. I'm going to go ahead and lean toward Virginia getting the job done against the number. All right, next contest I have for you, it is going to be Northern Iowa taking on Air Force, and that's going to be a 1 o'clock Eastern start time. No number posted yet for this game. Now, I'm not so sure how UNI is going to do with assignment football like this. This is like high-level assignment football. They did lose 3 out of their final 4 ball games last year, and they lost to the likes of Eastern Washington, Missouri State, and Illinois State. They're also taking on an Air Force squad who runs for 1,000,000 yards a game. Air Force won 8 out of their last 10 ball games last year, and they covered the number 8 times during that stretch. Now, they also scored 44 touchdowns on the ground as a team. They were led by Brad Roberts, who rushed for over 1,300 yards. Meanwhile, quarterback Hazik Daniels, he averaged nearly 5 yards a carry and ran it into the end zone 11 times on the ground as well. And aside from the Falcons' 2 overtime games, their defense allowed only 16 points a game. So I think we should probably have a favorable number here. Double digits, always a possibility, but I'm going to lean toward Air Force laying the points. All right, guys, like I said, long video here. I'm going to take a quick break. Give me a minute or two, and I'll be right back. Got to get another bottle of water because the pipes are getting a little dry here. All right, guys. Sorry about that. I appreciate you letting me take a break there because this is a long video. We still got a lot more to go through. So let's go ahead and get back into it. Let's go ahead and talk about Southeast Missouri State taking on Iowa State. That's going to be a 2 o'clock Eastern kickoff on Saturday. No line yet set for this contest. And even though the Cyclones struggled down the home stretch last year, they played some pretty good defense in many different spots. In their contest against Kansas, K-State, Oklahoma State, Texas, and TCU, they allowed just 13 points a game on average. Wow, that's a big sample size, but certainly some teams to note. They also have returning senior Will McDonald, who wreaked havoc in the backfield last year. The DN had 11.5 sacks and 5 forced fumbles. Now they're taking on a Red Hawks team who lost to the likes of Murray State, Tennessee Martin, and Tennessee Tech. I'm going to lean toward Iowa State getting the job done against the spread. Next ball game, Bowling Green, UCLA, 2:30 p.m. East. Hey, we got a line for this game. UCLA is minus 24, totals 57 and a hook. We're seeing Bowling Green money in this one. 2-point fade of UCLA in the early betting. Now, the Bruins had little issue putting up points last year. They scored 24 points or more in 9 out of their last 10 ball games. Matter of fact, they put up 62 on USC in an absolute rout. Quarterback Dorian Thompson-Robinson threw for 21 touchdowns compared to just 6 picks. He also averaged over 4.5 yards a carry and scored 9 times on the ground. Now, they're taking on a Bowling Green team who played Swiss cheese defense in the MAC last year. These guys allowed 40 points a game in their last 7 contests, throwing out the Ohio game. And when it comes to the total, no real surprise. 5 out of BG's last 7 outings did get over the number. Meanwhile, UCLA went 4-1 to the over in their last 5. I'm going to lean toward UCLA minus 24, over 57.5. Next matchup, it is going to be Arizona taking on San Diego State, 3:30 p.m. East. Now, San Diego State is minus 6, totals 46 and a hook. Two-way action on the total, 1-point move towards San Diego State. The Aztecs did win 8 out of their final 10 ball games last year, and they did a real nice job defensively. They held their opponents to just 15 points a game in those victories I just mentioned. Patrick McMorris, he also led the defense with 4 interceptions along with 90 tackles and 9 PBU. Meanwhile, Jonah Taivai and Keyshawn Banks, they combined for 13.5 sacks between the two of them. Now they're taking on an Arizona program who really couldn't move the ball for shit last year. They scored 19 points or less in 8 out of their last 10 ball games. And the Wildcats' leading rusher ran for only 302 yards and averaged less than 3.5 yards a carry. Now, total-wise, 5 out of Arizona's last 8 fell under the number. Meanwhile, San Diego State went 60% to the under in their last 10. I'm going to lean toward the Aztecs minus 6, under 46.5. Next ball game, UTEP, Oklahoma, 3:30 p.m. East. OU's minus 31, totals 57. And because of the exodus of talent and personnel out of Oklahoma, the markets are moving toward UTEP in this one. We actually saw a 2-point move toward the Miners already. That mine, though, I actually don't really think it makes a difference. UTEP gave up a whole bunch of points down the home stretch last year. And, of course, they simply just don't stack up talent-wise. They're not built for a track meet. As a matter of fact, these guys averaged just 20 points a game in their last 7 outings of 2021, throwing out that game against Rice. Now, they're facing an Oklahoma defense who not a lot of people talk about their defense because they give up a lot of points and spots. But this Oklahoma defense, they played tough against the likes of Iowa State, Texas Tech, and West Virginia last year. Really kept them in the game. Some could argue, it was a defense that won the game for them in those matchups. Now, Deshaun White, he had 61 tackles along with a fumble recovery. And even though, like I said, some offensive personnel moved on from Oklahoma, I think just talent-wise, the Sooners still just trump UTEP. Now, total-wise, the Miners did see 5 out of their final 7 contests last season get over the number. I'm going to still lean toward Oklahoma minus 31, over 57. Next matchup, Tulsa, Wyoming, 3:30 p.m. East. Tulsa's minus 6, totals 44. If you like the Cowboys of Wyoming, they're plus 205 to win it. Now we're seeing massive line movement toward the Golden Hurricane in this one. They opened 2 all the way up to 6. Total open 44.5 down to 44. Complete direct reaction, recency bias to Wyoming's performance last week. And well-deserved. We're looking at a Tulsa team on the other side who really finished the year of last season with a head of steam. They won their last 4 straight, and they covered in their last 5. And during that span, their defense was awful stingy. Held Old Dominion, Temple, and Tulane to just 40 total points combined. Anthony Goodlow, he had 6 sacks and 28 tackles from the line. Meanwhile, Justin Wright had 82 tackles, 3.5 sacks, and a whole bunch of turnovers. Now, they're taking on a Wyoming team who was nearly shut out in their opener this year, like I mentioned. They lost 38-6 to Illinois, and they threw for only 30 yards, 30 total yards passing. Quarterback Andrew Peasley, he went just 5 of 20, and he threw a pick. Now, total-wise, Tulsa did see overs last year against the likes of SMU, USF, and Memphis. I think they could probably put this one over the total themselves. I'm going to lean toward Tulsa -6 over 44. Next matchup, a lot of folks are going to have some eyes on this one. Oregon taking on Georgia, 3:30 Eastern start time at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. So it's not going to be in Athens, but still pretty much a home game for Georgia, although it's not going to go into the record books as a home game. It'll go in as a neutral site game. But anyway, Georgia's -17, totals 53. Movement toward the Bulldogs and the over in this one. And to be on the defending champs, well, I think this number actually kind of seems like a bargain. They gave up like no points last year, and they continue to reload with talent. They actually get leading sack man Robert Beal back this season. He had 6.5 sacks along with 23 tackles. Meanwhile, Nolan Smith had 55 tackles along with 3.5 sacks himself. They're taking on an Oregon squad who lost 3 out of their final 4 ball games last season. And they played some horrible defense. These guys allowed 38 points a game in their final 4 contests. They also lose starting quarterback Anthony Brown to the NFL on the offensive side of things. And to be fair, these guys would have been little threat to pass the ball on Georgia regardless. Their leading returning receiver had just 419 yards last year and 2 scores. So it didn't matter who they had at quarterback. They're not going to throw against Georgia. They're just not going to be able to. Now, total-wise, it's a tricky spot because the Bulldogs do have the ability to put it over the number themselves. That said, though, they did go 7-3 to the under to close out 2021. Meanwhile, Oregon saw unders last year against the likes of Washington, Cal, and Utah twice. So I'm going to lean toward Georgia -17 and the under 53 in that tight window. All right, next game, Norfolk, Marshall, 3:30 p.m. East. This game is off the board, and even though Marshall sputtered down the home stretch last year, they still covered the number against the likes of Charlotte, Florida Atlantic, and Appalachian State last year. And in those final 4 games, until those final 4 games, Marshall's defense was, I'm going to use a word from Mike Tyson, impregnable. Very good defense. Marshall's defense was impregnable at one point last year. Stephen Gilmore, 3 picks, 8 PBUs, 53 total tackles. Meanwhile, Abe Beauplan was all over the field. He had 110 tackles along with 2.5 sacks and a forced fumble. When it comes to offensive production, the Herd had little problem running the football. Rasheen Ali ran for over 1,400 yards and scored a staggering 23 times on the ground, 23 rushing touchdowns. Matter of fact, the Herd had 38 total rushing TDs for the entire season. They're taking on a Norfolk squad who lost to the likes of South Carolina State, Delaware State, and NC Central last season. Spartans also allowed 26 points or more in 8 out of their last 11. I'm going to lean toward Marshall getting the job done against the spread. Next ball game, North Dakota taking on Nebraska, 3:30 p.m. East. No number yet for this game. And whatever number they put up here for Nebraska, I'm not so certain they can cover it. They gave up they gave up 31 points to Northwestern in a season-opening loss over in Dublin, Ireland. And the Cornhuskers they failed to put consistent pressure on the quarterback. Now, when it comes to covering the spread, the Huskers have now failed to cover in 7 out of their last 9 ball games, dating back to last season. And even though their opponents, they're just an FCS school, well, North Dakota played some pretty tough defense last year. They They allowed only 17 points a game in their last 9 outings. I think the books, once again, they're going to put a big number in this one. They're going to put a pretty big number out, and I don't think Nebraska will cover it. They should win, might even go to overtime, but I don't think Nebraska, the state of their program right now, is in a good way. I don't think they're going to cover this number. Give me the North Dakota Fighting Hawks covering the point spread. Next ball game, Houston, Texas San Antonio, UTSA, 3:30 p.m. East. The Houston Cougars are -4, total 62. Now, we did see a half-a-point move toward UTSA and a 2-point move toward the over. But what we didn't see were covers out of this Roadrunner program down the home stretch last year. Texas San Antonio failed to cover in 4 out of their final 5 ball games last season. And they allowed 31 points or more 4 times during that stretch. Now, they're also facing a Houston squad who played some pretty tough defense for much of last year. D'Anthony Jones had 7 sacks along with 4 forced fumbles. Meanwhile, Donovan Mutin led the defense with 77 total tackles. Now, when it comes to offensive production, no one was stopping wideout Nathaniel Dell. He had over 1,300 receiving yards and 12 touchdowns. When it comes to the total in this one, Houston saw unders against the likes of Auburn, Memphis, and Temple. Meanwhile, Texas San Antonio saw unders against Southern Miss, Rice, and UNLV. I'm going to lean toward Houston -4, under 62. Next matchup I have for you, it is going to be Cincinnati taking on Arkansas, 3:30 p.m. East. Arkansas is -6.5, totals 52. Now we're seeing early movement toward the Bearcats and the under. And I'll tell you what, I think this is a big old bear trap. Regardless of the line move, it was the Razorbacks who won a bunch of games down the home stretch against much better competition. As a matter of fact, Arkansas covered the number against the likes of LSU, Alabama, and Penn State during that stretch I just mentioned. They also had no issues moving the football last year. KJ Jefferson threw for nearly 2,700 yards, along with 27 total touchdowns. Now, he was most effective scrambling and using his legs. Now, real quick, the quarterback, he limited his mistakes. He threw only 4 picks all year. But like I said, he was a threat scrambling and moving with his legs. That's something you're not going to see, in the stat book. Now, he's taking on a Cincy team who had some issues covering the point spread last year. They failed to cover in 5 out of their final 8 ball games, and that was against the likes of Navy, Tulane, and South Florida. They also lost starting quarterback Desmond Ridder to the Falcons, starting running back Jerome Ford to Cleveland. Now, total-wise, Cincinnati may have some success moving the football, but who knows? Arkansas, on the other side, they saw overs last year against the likes of Bama, Mississippi State, and Auburn. I like Arkansas -6.5, over 52. Next game should be a real good one here. Bethune-Cookman taking on Miami. The Hurricanes, 3:30 p.m. East. No line for this one. Now, the Canes really finished 2021 strong. They won 5 out of their last 6 ball games. That include a shocker over Pittsburgh. The Pitt Panthers. When it comes to offensive production, Miami had a little problem moving the football. They averaged nearly 40 points a game in their last 9 contests. Tyler Van Dyke threw for nearly 3,000 yards along with 25 touchdowns. When it comes to defensive play, Corey Flagg led the charge with 60 tackles and 3 sacks. Now they're taking on a Bethune-Cookman squad who lost to the likes of Florida A&M, Jackson State, and Prairie View last year. They also allowed a whole bunch of points in those defeats. I'm going to lean toward Miami, covering a very large number. Next game, BYU, South Florida, 4 o'clock East. The BYU Cougars are -12, totals 58. When it comes to covering the number, the Cougs of Brigham Young, they did not do a great job for gamblers last year. They failed to cover in their last 3 straight, and they also went 3-7 against the spread in their last 10. Matter of fact, BYU suffered outright losses to the likes of Boise State and UAB. They also gave up their fair share of points on the defensive side of the ball. They're taking on a USF program who by no means played good football last season, but they did play good enough to cover a handful of point spreads. Matter of fact, the Bulls went 6-3 against the number in their last 9 ball games, with covers over the likes of UCF, Cincinnati, and this very BYU team. Antonio Greer, he had 85 tackles on the defensive side of the ball. He also had 3 sacks, a fumble recovery, 2 interceptions, and a pick 6. Total-wise, USF saw overs against Cincinnati, Houston, and BYU. Meanwhile, the Cougs went 4-1 to the over in their last 5. Give me South Florida plus 12, keeping this one close, over 58. Next game, UC Davis, Cal, 4 o'clock East, no number. And as bad as they were on offense, the Golden Bears did string together a handful of wins and covers down the home stretch last year. They went 4-2 straight up in their last 6, with outright wins over the likes of USC, Stanford, and Oregon State. They also went 6-3 against the number in their last 9, and they played some really good defense in those covers. Daniel Scott and Nate Rachenia had 6 interceptions between the two of them, while Muelu Iosefa had 59 tackles on the year. Now they're taking on a UC Davis team who lost their last 3 straight to end the season last year. They allowed over 40 points a game on average in those losses. I'm going to go ahead and lean toward Cal getting the job done against the spread. All right, next contest I have for you. Are you ready? Troy, Ole Miss, 4 o'clock East. Ole Miss is minus 21, totals 58. Now, we're actually seeing a lot of movement toward Troy in the early going here. And we actually did see a 3-point move toward Troy. 3-point move toward the Trojans. But regardless, this is a Rebel team of Ole Miss who played some really good football last season. They won 7 out of their last 9. They played incredibly tough defense during that stretch. A.J. Finley had 3 interceptions out of the secondary, including a pick 6. He also had 90 total tackles and 4 PBUs. Now they're taking on a Troy team who ended the year on a 3-game skid. They averaged only 12 points a game in those losses. Now the Trojans were also terrible against the number. They failed to cover in 7 out of their last 9. That includes failures against the likes of ULM, that's UL Monroe, Georgia Southern, and Texas State. Total-wise, Ole Miss saw their last 8 straight all fall under the number. 9-1 of the under in their last 10. Give me Ole Miss minus 21, under 58 in the tight window. Next contest, Nicholls taking on South Alabama. 5 o'clock Eastern showdown. No line posted for this game. Now, South Alabama may have a tough time covering a number here. They finished last year on a 4-game skid, and they also lost 7 out of their last 9. Gotta imagine South Alabama's going to be favored in this one. Might even be laying double digits. Going to be tough for them to cover. Now, speaking of which, they failed to cover last season against the likes of Troy, UL Monroe, and Alcorn State. The Jags actually ran into some big problems defensively. They allowed 38 points a game in their last 5 losses. They're also facing a Nicholls team who did score a bunch of points last year. These guys averaged 36 points a game in their final 5 contests, so they're not completely helpless. I think the number's going to be too big. Nicholls should be able to cover it. Give me Nicholls State covering the point spread. Next matchup, Texas State taking on Nevada, 5:30 p.m. East. Pretty short shot here. Nevada's just -1, totals 51. And we saw enormous movement on both the side and the total in this one. The Wolfpack opened 8 all the way down to 1. Total opened 57 all the way down to 51. And as lackluster as Nevada's offense looked in the opener, they certainly played tough on defense. This Wolfpack secondary got 4 interceptions against New Mexico State, and that includes 2 of them by Isaiah Isisima. Now, Bentley Sanders and Tyson Williams, they also combined for 10 total tackles between the 2 of them. The Nevada defense held New Mexico State to just 85 total yards on the ground. Now, they're facing a Texas State team on the other side who lost a bunch of ball games last year, and they had trouble moving the football. Now, this Bobcat D, they also allowed a disgusting amount of points, including 59 to the likes of Eastern Michigan. Eastern Michigan, the Eagles, they put up 59 points on Texas State. That's crazy. Now, total-wise, I still don't think we'll see a track meet here. Texas State went 5-1 to the under in their final 6 ball games of 2021. Meanwhile, Nevada saw unders against the likes of San Diego State, San Jose State, and Hawaii last year. I'm going to lean toward Nevada -1 getting the job done in the under 51. Next contest, Rice, USC, 6 o'clock East. The USC Trojans, the new-look USC Trojans, are -34, total 62. 1 point fade of the Trojans in the early wagering. And, of course, this is the debut of Lincoln Riley at USC. And I'm just not completely certain this thing's going to completely click in his first game. This is a great coach. This is a great fit. This is going to work. But in the first game, the inaugural game, I don't think it's going to click as good as people think. They're going to win. They're going to get the job done. But new terminology and concepts are hard to get a grasp of. And this is a mighty big number for a debut at a big school. Now, the Trojans also lost star running back Keontae Ingram and receiver Drake London to the NFL. And this Trojan defense was certainly not crisp last season. They got torched at times. They allowed 31 points or more in 7 out of their final 9 ball games. Now, they're taking on a Rice school who doesn't win a whole lot of games themselves. Make no mistake about it. Not equally as talented. Not equally, they don't have resources. They don't have better coaches. But they did upset Louisiana Tech last year and UAB. They overachieved. They were actually the 24-point dog against UAB in that win. Wide receiver Cedric Patterson, he averaged over 15 yards of reception last year and had 6 scores. So if this Rice O-line can give their quarterback even just a little bit of time, they do have a threat at receiver. Now, total-wise, I'm not expecting a ton of defense in this one. Rice saw their last 4 straight all get over the number. Meanwhile, USC went 6-3 to the over in their last 9. USC is going to win this one. Rice, I think, can just barely cover. They're just going to barely keep this one close. Probably lose by 30. I like Rice plus 34 over 62. Next matchup, Middle Tennessee State taking on James Madison, 6 o'clock East. JMU's -6, totals 58 and a hook. We saw a 1-point move toward the Middle Tennessee in the early going. And the Blue Raiders, they covered a handful of numbers last season. Now, in addition to winning 6 out of their last 9, they successfully covered the number 6 times during that span. As a matter of fact, 5 of those covers I just mentioned, the Blue Raiders were double-digit underdogs. So, big-time covering team here. Jordan Ferguson had 9 big sacks on the season along with 3 forced fumbles and a scoop and score. They're taking on a JMU team who certainly had a great season in the FCS last year. Make no mistake about that. But they did suffer losses to the likes of Villanova and North Dakota State. And when it comes to the total, Middle Tennessee saw overs against the likes of Toledo, Florida International, and Western Kentucky. Give me Middle Tennessee State +6, keeping this one close, over 58.5. Next matchup, Morgan State, Georgia Southern, 6 o'clock East, off the board. And as bad as Georgia Southern was last year, they covered the number in their last 3 straight games against Appalachian State, BYU, and Texas State. Defensively, Justin Ellis had 5 sacks, 36 tackles. Meanwhile, Anthony Wilson led the charge with 9 PBU and 77 total tackles himself. They're taking on a Morgan State team who lost to the likes of Albany, Norfolk, and NC Central. These guys also played some pretty bad defense last year. Give me Georgia Southern covering the point spread. Next game, Florida Atlantic, Ohio, 6 o'clock East. FAU's -4 totals 50. We saw a 1.5 point move toward Florida Atlantic and the over. No real surprise there. Now, the Owls looked really good in the season opener on Saturday. They put up 43 points against Charlotte and held them to just 13. N'Kosi Perry completed 73% of his passes and threw for over 255 yards. Meanwhile, running back Larry McCammon carried it 14 times for 118 yards and a score. And equally as impressive was this Owl defense. Justin McKiffin had 3 tackles and a 63-yard pick six. Meanwhile, we don't show love to the special teams, but kicker Morgan Suarez, he was a perfect 3 for 3 on field goals, including a pair of 40-plus yarders. Like I said, don't show much love to the special teamers, but that certainly needs to be acknowledged. Now, Ohio, on the other side, they're coming off a tough year where they didn't win many ball games, and they gave up a whole lot of points. When it comes to the total, the Bobcats did see overs against Toledo, Miami, Ohio, and Louisiana. Give me Florida Atlantic -4 over 50. Next game, Elon, Vanderbilt, 7 o'clock East. No number. Vandy kicked the crap out of Hawaii on the island last week. They put up 63 against the Rainbow Warriors, and they held them to just 10 points. Maxwell Worship led the charge with 7 tackles and a PBU. Meanwhile, offensively, quarterback Mike Wright threw for $146 and ran for $163. Pretty much a 300-yard day, just 1 yard shy. Now, no real surprise here. The quarterback had 4 total touchdowns on the day. They are taking on an Elon defense who allowed 38 points a game in their last 3 losses. Give me Vandy getting the job done against the spread. Next game, South Dakota, Kansas State, 7 o'clock East. This game's off the board. Now, the Wildcats won 5 out of their last 7 ball games, and they played some really tough defense in the process. The Wildcats held their opponents to just 17 points a game during that time frame I just mentioned. They also beat the likes of Texas Tech, TCU, and LSU during that stretch. Felix Enadike Uzama had 11 big sacks on the year and led the NCAA in forced fumbles. I believe it was 6 of them. Meanwhile, linebacker Daniel Green had a, did I say linebacker? That's a linebacker. Daniel Green. He had a team best 89 total tackles, along with 3 sacks and a couple of fumble recoveries. Now, they're taking on a South Dakota team who lost to the likes of Southern Illinois, North Dakota State, and Illinois State. They were actually held to just 16 points a game on average in those losses. Really struggled offensively. Give me K-State covering the number. Next game, Army, Coastal Carolina, 7 o'clock East. The Chanticleers of Coastal Carolina, they are -3. Totals 53.5. Now, we did see a 1-point move toward Army in the under in this one. And I'll tell you what, it may not be a popular opinion, but I think Army's going to be tough to beat in this one. They got the W in 5 out of their last 6 games last year, and that includes a bowl win against Mizzou. They also took care of the high-powered Liberty Flames, holding them to just 16 points. Andre Carter had a staggering 15.5 sacks last year. He was second in college football in that category. Carter also had 4 forced fumbles and an interception. Meanwhile, Marquel Broughton had a couple of picks, 6 PBUs, and 70 total tackles. Meanwhile, on the offensive side of things, when it comes to running the football, well, the Black Knights averaged just about 5 yards a carry, and they scored 46 total touchdowns on the ground. Now, they're taking on a Coastal team who had a real tough time covering the number down the home stretch. Myrtle Beach failed to cover in 6 out of their final 7 ball games. They also played some pretty lackluster defense during that span. The Chanticleers allowed over 27 points a game during that stretch of games I just mentioned. When it comes to the total, we could see some more points than you think in this one. Coastal saw overs against the likes of Northern Illinois, Georgia State, and Troy last year. Meanwhile, Army saw overs against the likes of Bucknell and Wake Forest. I'm going to lean toward the Army Black Knights +3 over 53.5. That will not be a popular pick. All right, next game, Albany, Baylor, 7 o'clock East. No line posted for this game. Baylor won the Big 12 championship and held Ole Miss to just 7 points in their bowl game. Matter of fact, this Baylor defense was nearly impossible to score against down the home stretch. These guys allowed only 14 points a game in their final 4 ball games of 2021. And speaking of covering, the Bears, well, they didn't miss much. They covered in 7 out of their last 9. That includes games against Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, and Texas. It's OK State, OU, and the Texas Longhorns. Now, this Baylor defense had 19 interceptions on the year and a whole bunch of sacks. Gabe Hall had 6 sacks on the year along with 18 total tackles. Meanwhile, Dylan Doyle had 89 tackles, 4 PBU, and a pick. They're taking on an Albany squad who lost to the likes of Stony Brook, Towson, and Maine. I'm going to lean toward Baylor covering what will probably be a very large number. All right, next matchup I have for you, it is going to be Illinois State taking on Wisconsin, 7 o'clock Eastern kickoff. This game is off the board. The Badgers were red hot down the home stretch last year. They won 8 out of their last 9 ball games of 2021, and they hardly gave up any points. The Badgers allowed only 12 points a game during that span I just mentioned. Of course, Nick Herbig, he led the charge with 9 sacks, along with 61 tackles and 4 PDs. Now they're taking on an Illinois State program who had a tough time scoring points last year themselves. These guys averaged just 15 points a game in their final 8 ball games. This should be a tough one. They're going to have a tough time moving the football against the Badgers on Saturday. There's going to be a lot of injuries. These guys are going to get physically slaughtered. Give me Wisconsin covering the number. Next game, Grambling, Arkansas State, 7 o'clock East. No line set for this one. And even though Arkansas State had a pretty bad record last year, 6 out of their last 9 ball games were decided by 1 score. This was a competitive bunch. And offensively, they threw for over 3,700 yards and 27 touchdown passes. So it's a team that, like I said, they were competitive. They were not helpless. And if you don't prepare for them, you know, they'll hurt you. Now, to Valence Hunt, he comes back for his senior season, and he averaged nearly 15 yards a catch, and he had 6 touchdowns last year. Now, they're taking on a Grambling squad who lost to the likes of Arkansas Pine Bluff, Florida A&M, and Alcorn State. They gave up 28 points a game on average in those 3 losses. I'm going to lean toward Arkansas State getting the job done against the number. Next ball game, Southeast Louisiana taking on the Louisiana Raging Cajuns. A lot of folks still call them UL Lafayette, although it is just Louisiana. But they still are the Raging Cajuns, and that's going to be a 7 o'clock kickoff on Saturday. Yes, Lord. This game's off the board. The Cajuns won the Sun Belt last year, and they beat up on Marshall in the bowl game. And in addition to some very efficient offensive production, their defense was really tough to score against. The Cajuns gave up 21 points or less in 9 out of their last 10 ball games. Andre Jones and Zion Hill, they combined for 11.5 sacks on the season. Jones also had he also forced 2 fumbles and had a couple of fumble recoveries. Now they're taking on a Southeast Louisiana team who gave up a whole lot of points last season. These guys allowed over 40 points a game in their last 5 ball games. They also lost to the likes of Nicholls and Incarnate Word. Let's get it, dude. Give me Louisiana, the Raging Cajuns, covering the point spread. Next ball game, Liberty, Southern Miss, 7 o'clock East. Liberty's the 3-point favorite. Total's 49.5. Pretty good two-way action on the sides. Not a whole lot of movement with regard to the spread. We did see a 3-point move downward on the total. Probably a reaction to Liberty losing their quarterback Malik Willis. But even though Liberty has to replace an all-time quarterback, they did show flashes of a dominating defense in their games against Syracuse, UAB, Middle Tennessee, and Eastern Michigan. They allowed just 17 points a game on average. Now, Kendi Charles and Akil Washington, they combined for nearly double-digit sacks between the two of them. Javon Scruggs also had 6 PDs and 61 tackles. Now, they're taking on a Southern Miss team who had significant problems on the offensive side of the ball. These guys scored 19 points or less in 8 out of their final 10 ball games. Meanwhile, as a team, the Golden Eagles completed only 55% of their passes, and they threw more interceptions than TDs. Now, total-wise, we could see struggles on both sides offensively. USM went 60% to the under in their last 10 ball games last year. Meanwhile, Liberty, once again, they're replacing Malik Willis at quarterback. They also saw unders last year against the likes of Army, Ole Miss, and Syracuse. Give me Liberty -3, under 49.5. All right, next contest. It is going to be Miami, Ohio, taking on Kentucky, 7 o'clock East. The Kentucky Wildcats are -16, totals 54. And for whatever reason, we saw a 5-point fade of the Wildcats in the early going here. We also saw a 3-point move upward on the total. Now, Kentucky finished the season winning their last 4 straight. And they had some marquee wins over some big schools. The Wildcats took care of South Carolina, Florida, LSU, and Iowa in the bowl game. And they also moved the ball quite well in the second half of the season. Chris Rodriguez rushed for nearly 1,400 yards last year, and he averaged over 6 yards a carry. He also had a dozen combined touchdowns. Meanwhile, defensively, J.J. Weaver led the charge with 6.5 sacks, along with 34 tackles and a couple of picks. They're taking on a Miami team on the other side who lost to the likes of Kent State, Ohio, and Eastern Michigan. Matter of fact, this Red Hawk defense allowed 83 total points combined in their losses to Kent State and Ohio. Now, total-wise, 4 out of Miami's last 7 contests did get over the line. Meanwhile, Kentucky saw overs against the likes of Louisville, Tennessee, and Mississippi State. Give me Kentucky -16 over 54. Next matchup, UMass, Tulane, 7 o'clock East. Tulane's the 28-point favorite, totals 59. Movement toward UMass and the under. And as bad as UMass was last year, they did have some marquee covers over the likes of Army, UConn, and Eastern Michigan. And believe it or not, the UMass Minutemen, they did have a 1,000-yard rusher in Ellis Merriweather last year. The running back ran for nearly 1,200 yards and averaged over 5 yards a carry. When it comes to defensive play, Jarrell Johnson had 81 total tackles and 3 forced fumbles. Now, they're taking on a Tulane squad who lost 9 out of their last 10, and they really struggled on the defensive side of the ball. They allowed 35 points a game in those 10 contests I just mentioned, and their top 2 receivers didn't even eclipse 900 yards combined. Now, total-wise, 4 out of Tulane's last 5 did fall under the line. Meanwhile, UMass saw unders against Army, UConn, and Toledo. I'm going to go ahead and lean toward UMass +28 and the under 59. All right, guys, I'm going to take my next and final break for the show. Just give me a couple of minutes. Going to stretch out the legs. Starting to lose feeling in my butt cheeks because I've been sitting for so long. So just give me a few minutes. I'll be right back, and I appreciate you guys being patient with me. Just give me a sec here, guys. Alrighty, guys, down the home stretch. Let's go ahead and do this thing. And I'm glad you waited. Well, you probably just fast forward. You probably just scrolled through, which is all right with me. I wouldn't just look at a blank screen. But anyway, next game of interest. Utah taking on Florida, 7 o'clock in the Swamp. Utah is the 3-point favorite away from home. Totals 51. 1-point move toward the Utes in this one. Now, Utah put up a whole lot of points last season. They scored just about 40 points a game in their final 10 contests. Tavion Thomas rushed for over 1,100 yards and scored a staggering 21 times on the ground. Meanwhile, defensively, Van Fillinger and Junior Tafuna combined for double-digit sacks. Now, they're taking on a Gator team who lost 5 out of their final 7 and failed to cover in each and every one of those ball games. They also had significant problems offensively. They were held to 24 points or less in 6 out of their last 9 contests. Now, when it comes to the total, the Gators did see unders against the likes of UCF, Florida State, and Georgia. Meanwhile, 3 out of Utah's final 4 contests last year fell under the total. I'm going to lean toward Utah -3, under 51. Next matchup. It is going to be Mercer, Auburn, 7 o'clock East. No line. And even though the Tigers lost a bunch of games down the home stretch, their defense actually showed a lot of resiliency last season. Derek Hall had 9 sacks on the year, along with 52 tackles and a couple of forced fumbles. Meanwhile, Colby Wooden had 61 tackles and 5 sacks himself. And even though the Tigers couldn't pass for shit offensively, they did rely heavily on Tank Bigsby, who was a 1,000-yard rusher with 10 touchdowns. Now, they're taking on a Mercer team on the other side of things who lost games to the likes of East Tennessee State and VMI. I'm going to lean toward Auburn laying the points. Next matchup, it is going to be Notre Dame taking on Ohio State, 7:30 p.m. East. Ohio State's -17.5, totals 59. 2.5-point move toward the Buckeyes in this one, and for good reason. These guys averaged 48 points a game in their final 10 contests. The Buckeyes were able to do it both on the ground and in the air. C.J. Stroud completed 72% of his passes and threw for over 4,400 yards. Now, Stroud also had 44 touchdowns compared to just 6 picks. Now, his favorite target's also back in Jackson Smith-Jigba. He caught 95 balls for over 1,600 yards. When it comes to running the football, Travion Henderson had over 1,200 yards and scored 15 times on the ground. Now, they're taking on a Notre Dame squad on the other side of things, who's got a new head coach and a new starting quarterback. They also lost running back Kyron Williams and receiver Kevin Austin to the NFL. This could get ugly for the Irish. The Buckeyes also could potentially put the total over themselves. The Notre Dame faithful, not going to like this pick. I'm going to lean toward Ohio State, -17.5, over 59. Next matchup, it is going to be Georgia State taking on South Carolina, 7:30 p.m. East. South Carolina's -12.5, totals 57. And if you like Georgia State in an upset, they're +350 for some money line cash. Movement toward the Panthers in the over in this one. But if you think Georgia State can get the job done here, just keep in mind, they were beating up on teams like UL Monroe, Georgia Southern, and Arkansas State. They also suffered outright losses to the likes of Louisiana and Appalachian State. And as good as their offense was at times, well, their defense definitely had a handful of dreadful games. They're going to have to stop a South Carolina team who beat the likes of North Carolina, Auburn, and Florida in the second half of the season last year. The Cox are also led by Brad Johnson, who has 74. He had 74 tackles last season and 2.5 sacks. Now, total-wise, South Carolina saw unders against the likes of Clemson, Auburn, and Vanderbilt. Meanwhile, 5 out of the Panthers' final 7 contests fell under the number. I'm going to lean toward South Carolina, -12.5, under 57. Next ball game, Memphis, Mississippi State, 7:30 p.m. East. The Mississippi State Bulldogs are minus 16, totals 56. Now, the Bulldogs had solid wins over the likes of Auburn, Kentucky, and Texas A&M last season. They were also led defensively by Emmanuel Forbes with 3 interceptions, 5 PBUs, and 59 total tackles. When it comes to putting pressure on the quarterback, Tyrus Wheat had 7 sacks along with 46 tackles and a pick. Now, in their victories against Kentucky and Vanderbilt, this Bulldog D gave up just 23 total points combined. Now, they're taking on a Memphis squad on the other side of things who lost a whole bunch of games last season. The Tigers actually dropped 6 out of their final 9. And that includes losses to the likes of East Carolina, Tulsa, and Temple. Now, the Tiger defense was also really bad. They gave up 24 points or more in 9 out of their last 10 outings. Now, when it comes to the number, Memphis saw overs against the likes of Tulane, ECU, and Temple. Meanwhile, on the other side of things, Mississippi State went 4-2 to the over in their last 6 themselves. I'm going to lean toward Mississippi State minus 16, over 56. Next ball game, it is going to be SMU taking on North Texas, 7:30 Eastern start time. SMU's minus 11, total 68.5. 2-point move toward the Mustangs, 2-way action on the total. But as explosive as SMU was last year, their lack of defense cost them 4 out of their final 5 ball games. Matter of fact, during that time frame, the Mustangs D allowed over 36 points a game. They're taking on a North Texas squad who put up 31 points in the opener against UTEP. The Mean Green actually amassed 399 yards of total offense as quarterback Austin Awney threw for 3 touchdowns. Now, defensively, on the other side of things, that 13-point effort was led by K.D. Davis, who had 8 tackles on the day. When it comes to covering the number, the Mean Green covered in 8 out of their last 10 ball games dating back to last season. North Texas total-wise, North Texas did see their opener fall 9 points below the line. Meanwhile, SMU saw unders last year against the likes of Cincinnati, Memphis, and Navy. Give me North Texas plus 11, keeping this one close, under 68.5. Next game, Utah State, Alabama, 7:30 p.m. East. Bama's minus 42, total 62 and a hook. And when Bama's been preparing for you for 8 months, you're in trouble. Bad things are going to happen. Bryce Young threw for nearly 4,900 yards last year and 47 touchdowns. Meanwhile, defensively, Will Anderson led the country with a staggering 17.5 sacks on the season. Now, they're taking on a Utah State team who won a whole bunch of games last season themselves. Having said that, though, they had some difficulties getting past UConn in the opener last week, and they failed to cover by a long shot. Now, total-wise, the Aggies are going to have a tough time scoring points. Plus, their opener fell 8 points below the posted total for that game. Meanwhile, on the other side, Bama saw unders last season against the likes of Georgia, Cincinnati, and Auburn. I'm going to lean toward Alabama minus 42 and the under 62.5 in the tight window. Next ball game, Murray State, Texas Tech, 8 o'clock East, no line. Texas Tech did a nice job covering some numbers last season. They went 6-3 against the spread in their final 9 contests, with covers over the likes of Mississippi State, Baylor, and Iowa State. They also moved the ball pretty well in a handful of those covers. The Red Raiders threw for over 3,300 yards last season. They're also facing a Murray State team on the other side of things who lost to the likes of Tennessee State, Austin Peay, and Tennessee Martin. They actually gave up 106 total points in those 3 losses. I'm going to go ahead and lean toward Texas Tech getting the job done against the spread. All right, next ball game I have for you, it is going to be Maine taking on New Mexico. in a snooze fest, 8 o'clock Eastern start time. And for the exception of a fluke win against Wyoming, New Mexico wasn't even competitive last year. They lost 9 out of their final 10 contests, and they covered the number only once during that time frame. Meanwhile, offensively, New Mexico, they were held to 17 points or less in all of those contests that I just mentioned. Now, the Lobos threw for under 1,400 yards last year as a team. That's terrible. And as a matter of fact, their leading receiver had no touchdowns, and he averaged less than 9.5 yards a catch. Now, they're taking on a main squad who actually played some pretty tough defense last year in the FCS. They got the W in 5 out of their last 6 games, and they allowed only 18 points a game on average during that stretch. I think that Maine should be able to keep this one close. Probably another situation that, the number's going to be way too high. I think Maine should be able to cover. So I'm going to lean toward the Maine Black Bears plus the points. Next matchup, little ACC action. I'm talking about Louisville taking on Syracuse, 8 o'clock Eastern start time. Louisville's minus 4.5, totals 57. Early movement on the Cards, 1.5 point move toward Louisville. The Cards were highly competitive last season. 4 out of their last 6 losses were just by 1 score, keeping things close. They also had little issue moving the football. They scored 24 points or more in 8 out of their last 10 outings. Of course, Malik Cunningham, that dual threat, he threw for 19 touchdowns and ran for another 20. That's crazy. That's insane. As a matter of fact, Cunningham rushed for over 1,000 yards, and he averaged 6 yards a carry. Imagine preparing for that defensively all week. That's got to be giving your D coordinator nightmares. Now, the Cards are taking on a Syracuse team who had a pretty tough time stopping anybody down the home stretch last season. They dropped their final 3 ball games, and they gave up 38 points a game on average during that span. And when it comes to offensive production, the Orange, they were simply no threat throwing the football. They threw for under 1,900 yards as a team, along with just 10 touchdown passes. As a matter of fact, the Orange's leading receiver had less than 400 yards on the year. Now, total-wise, Syracuse did see overs against NC State, Virginia Tech, and Wake Forest. Meanwhile, 4 out of Louisville's last 5 got over the line. I'm going to lean toward Louisville minus 4.5, over 57. Next game, UL Monroe taking on Texas, 8 o'clock East. The Texas Longhorns are minus 37, total 64. Early line movement fading the Longhorns. We also saw a 3-point move downward on the total. Now, this Nebraska defense had a despicable season last year. Texas. This Texas defense had a despicable season last year, and they even gave up 57 points to Kansas in an overtime loss. The Longhorns finished the year losing 6 out of their final 7 and allowing over 36 points a game in the process. Now, they're taking on a UL Monroe team who was fairly competitive in that Sun Belt Conference. Not only did they successfully cover their last 2 straight, they nearly upset the likes of Louisiana, Arkansas State, and Texas State. They also had a shocking upset of Malik Willis and the Liberty Flames by the final of 31-28. The Warhawks are going to return Zach Woodard, who had 89 tackles last year, along with 3.5 sacks. The linebacker also had 3 PBUs and a pick in coverage. And when it comes to the total, UL Monroe saw unders against LSU, Texas State, and Troy last season. Meanwhile, Texas saw 6 out of their last 8 fall under the line themselves. I'm going to lean toward UL Monroe plus 37, under 64. Next game, Colgate, Stanford, 8 o'clock East. No line currently posted for this game. And even though Stanford's coming off a horrible year, they did beat the likes of Oregon and Vanderbilt. Levani Damuni led the D with 86 tackles along with a couple of sacks. Meanwhile, Ricky Mizan had 68 tackles along with a couple of sacks himself. They're taking on a Colgate team who lost to the likes of Holy Cross, Cornell, and Brown. They allowed just about 36 points a game in those losses. I'm going to lean towards Stanford getting the job done against the spread. Next matchup, Idaho taking on Washington State, 9:30 p.m. East. Games off the board. The Washington State Cougs, well, they covered a whole bunch of point spreads last season. Out of their final 10 games, they covered 8 times. Meanwhile, defensively, well, these guys definitely had a knack for creating turnovers. These guys forced a staggering 35 turnovers last year. MARSH, he had a couple of forced fumbles and 3 interceptions, including a pick 6. Meanwhile, Brennan Jackson and Ron Stone, they combined for double-digit sacks between the two of them. They're taking on an Idaho team on the other side of things who finished the 2021 season with a 4-7 record. They lost to teams like Northern Arizona, UC Davis, and Eastern Washington.
Whenever you're done, food's done.
Oh, okay. I like the Cougs to clean up here. Give me Washington State against the spread. All right, next matchup, Kent State taking on Washington, 10:30 p.m. East. The Washington Huskies are minus 23, totals 59.5. 1 point move toward the Huskies in this one. And despite significant struggles on offense, the Huskies were led by linebacker Jackson Sermon with 91 tackles and an interception. Meanwhile, Carson Bruner had 69 tackles himself, along with a couple of forced fumbles. They're taking on a Kent State squad who was horrible on defense themselves. They allowed 41 points or more in 5 out of their final 6 games last season. I think Washington's speed should give these guys problems. Give me the Huskies, minus 23, over 59 and a hook. All right, next ball game. Boise State taking on Oregon State, 10:30 p.m. East. The Oregon State Beavers are minus 3 with a total at 57. We are seeing early movement toward the Boise State Broncos and the under. Now, Boise played some really tough defense down the home stretch last year. They allowed just 19 points a game on average in their final 6 contests. Of course, Scott Matlock, he led the pass rush with 7 sacks on the year and 41 tackles. Meanwhile, J.L. Skinner had the most tackles on the team with 92. Now, Skinner also had a couple of forced fumbles and 2 picks. Now, they're taking on an Oregon State squad on the other side who lost 4 out of their last 6 themselves. And they got beat by the likes of Utah State, Colorado, and Cal during that span. The Beaver D also had their issues. They had issues. They allowed 24 points or more in 8 out of their last 10 ball games. And when it comes to the total, Oregon State saw unders against the likes of Arizona State, Stanford, and Wazoo. Meanwhile, Boise State went 9-1 to the under in their last 10 themselves. I'm going to lead toward the Boise State Broncos plus 3, under 57.